calls on 0861 987 000. So let's look forward to that conversation. Before then, we are going to be speaking to Yvonne Wakefield, who's the CEO of Caveat Legal. Your lawyers, even the name itself is a legal term. Yvonne, good evening to you.
Good evening, Kaya. Thanks for having me.
Now, Yvonne, the legal field can be very complicated, and if you go to Twitter, it even gets even more complicated. But back to the normal field. I mean, over the years, I suppose one of those professions that has probably stayed true to the practices of old, where people wear very strange things when they go to court, where you can't speak to attorneys and advocates, that you have to refer each other. Very complex. And as the world evolves, I begin to wonder, has the legal profession kept up?
It's such a good question, and, it's exactly why we're here. In the past, as you pointed out, the legal industry was designed by lawyers and propped up by lawyers. Lawyers decided how legal services would be delivered, at what price levels, on what terms. And for some reason, the legal industry didn't seem to consider itself to be subject to market forces or obliged to listen to its customers. So, other sectors need to be responsive to their markets, but somehow the legal industry didn't think it needed to do the same. Until recently, companies needing legal work or commercial legal work would need to brief a traditional law firm, consult with the lawyers at their offices, pay the rates prescribed by the lawyers, and wait for the time that it took to deliver the work. But on our investigation some 10 years ago, we actually observed that the market for commercial legal services wanted something different. It actually wanted good quality legal services provided quickly and without fuss and fanfare, and at a reasonable cost. So to us, the obvious way to achieve this was to build a platform business model like an Airbnb or an Uber that simply connects specialist lawyers with businesses without any bulk, fanfare or cost associated with the traditional firms. So we did this by putting together a virtual legal consultancy, and we've seen exponential growth. And so what we've done, to get to your first point, was we've basically just gone back to basics. We've simplified the whole thing. We've removed as much complexity as we could, and it looks like the market is happy with this.
Yvonne, if I was your lawyer, I'd be angry right now, because the way you've presented it sounds like it's something you've done recently and people would think you did it in response to COVID. But you actually had the presence of mind to look at this almost a decade ago to say, well, this thing has to evolve. And that's when you started putting together Caveat Legal.
Yeah, exactly. I probably qualified almost 20 years ago. And, I became a lawyer because I wanted to be able to help people. And then I got into traditional practice and, somehow it wasn't really about helping people. All of a sudden we were chasing fee targets and, we were in management meetings and training meetings and all types of things. And so for me, quite a long time ago, it became clear that we kind of lost the plot a little bit and that things could be changed and done in a completely different way. So I started Caveat 10 years ago. And it's so interesting, going into COVID, where everyone was moving online. We've been online, we've been virtual from day one. So we didn't have to make a single change to our operations when COVID hit. And in fact, we saw our best year ever. We saw revenue growth of 65% in the last financial year, which is absolutely off the charts and fantastic.
Now, Yvonne, that one of the traditional practices, that referral system, which I must confess, I absolutely do not understand. I mean, I've got friends who are advocates, and then as soon as I say there's a problem, they're like, no, don't talk to us, talk to someone else. Makes absolutely no sense to me. Is it something that was historically just structured as a legal process in that you couldn't do it any other way? Are we seeing maybe a change towards saying, well, why add this additional cost to a person who wants to access legal services and force them to pay two practitioners instead of one? What are the changes there?
Yes, actually our regulators have done a very good job. Our legislators and our regulators have done a very good job at removing some of those barriers. So now you actually don't need to brief an attorney who then briefs an advocate for you. You can brief an advocate directly. And many attorneys do have the right of appearance in court, so they can actually represent you in court without an advocate. Of course, all of these things were done to try and make the legal industry more accessible to the public. Where we fit in is actually not on the litigation side, it's more on the commercial side. So all of our clients are kind of businesses that are doing deals, big transactions. Most of our clients are investors, so private equity businesses or venture capitalists who are doing deals and are needing commercial legal services. And that's where we saw that we could actually make a big difference by providing an alternative to the traditional law firm model for those types of clients.
Some people have commented that the one industry that seems to have been thriving in the past decade or so is the legal industry. Some of the fanciest buildings we see in Sandton are indeed attributed to law firms. What drives the demand? Is it a question of the conflicts that need to be resolved or just the complexities associated with doing business in the modern day world?
I think it is the complexity. With each year that passes, new laws are passed. The compliance burden on businesses out there is just massive. And so, with each year that passes, things do become more complex. And unfortunately, companies are needing to use lawyers to help them to understand, what the law means and how it applies to their businesses. So I think that's the main reason.
A very interesting one, because I suppose if you look at the history of the modern day evolution of the profession, the Legal Practice Act, is it something that was widely seen as the game changer that enabled or facilitated easier access for people like me to get legal services? Is it fit for purpose?
We're yet to see. I think some of the changes have been very good changes. We're yet to kind of see the benefit actually trickle down to the consumer. Unfortunately, many of the big traditional law firms have stayed exactly the way that they are. As you mentioned, they're kind of brick and mortar operations operating out of huge, big, lavish buildings that actually aren't strictly necessary to the provision of good legal services. So that's one of the big overheads that we thought was completely unnecessary and would just do away with. So it's going to be interesting to see now how things go, but we certainly think that the market is responding well. I think, we still have a long way to go to make legal services, much more accessible and easy for the consumer, whether the consumer is a business or a lay person to use. But, one step at a time. But yes, I think the regulator's doing well and I think the Legal Practice Act is definitely a step in the right direction.
The role of technology seems to be embraced in every profession except the legal one, because if I want to sue you, there is a need for me to go and say to a sheriff, please go and knock, and until you see her face, do not come back, so that you can prove that she's been served. How are we in really just getting to the step where even the legal practitioners are going to have to deal with the fact that maybe technology is unavoidable rather than trying to resist it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's been interesting running a platform business that's completely virtual with lawyers, many of whom consider themselves to be, and I'm doing air quotes here, not good at technology. It needs a mindset change from the lawyers. But having said that, COVID has actually been fantastic. You've had so many court appearances and hearings actually conducted completely online for the first time. You've got serving and filing of legal documents happening online for the first time. So certainly there have been some improvements. And I think the younger generations, as they come into the profession, are definitely much more open to it and leading that change. It's the kind of, it's the guys sitting at the top of the food chain that are less easy to change, but the change is definitely happening.
Now, obviously, Yvonne, there will be some risks, and I suppose that correct term may be legal risks associated with that move to technology, because suddenly if somebody can generate a document on their computer, send it to you, you think it comes from me, and suddenly many years later on I say, I never did that, I definitely never touched this document, then we all find ourselves in a bind. How are we responding to the need to still ensure the integrity of some of the more legally binding documents, some of the critical ones, and also not be hamstrung by the question of, oops, where is the sheriff?
Technology is, yes, there are risks associated with technology, but my argument is that actually there are fewer risks associated with technology than there are in just human error. People make mistakes. And the reason why all law firms, and so do we, have so much insurance is because people make mistakes. It turns out that machines actually don't make as many mistakes. So I do think that the move is a good one. But, we have to keep looking at risk, whether it's technological risk or human error, and we need to make sure that we provide for that risk so that our clients are protected. And any law firm, ourselves included, have to look at this very carefully and make sure that we're operating in the most responsible way possible.
And one of the interesting things, of course, is that in the world of technology, it is still possible for me to Google my way through a particular set of parameters and probably find something that is close enough to the type of document that you'll be putting for me as a lawyer. Are you seeing a lot more people saying that, look, if all I need is a basic lease contract, I'll definitely find something online. If I need a prenup, I might find something online. I probably wouldn't recommend it for prenups. But are you seeing a lot of clients saying that actually I don't have to pay you in order to do this? Somebody's already done it and all I have to do is change this and that?
Definitely. There's a lot of use, particularly by SMEs, early stage entrepreneurs people who don't have a lot of funds to spend on this kind of thing, are copying and pasting, from templates, getting templates online, borrowing from friends, those kinds of things. It's definitely happening. It comes with a huge amount of risk, but sometimes it's better than nothing. We always obviously would, advise that lawyers look at these things, because the job of a lawyer is to ask the what ifs. What if things go wrong? What if this party doesn't perform in terms of their obligations, those types of things. So, we'd always recommend that, lawyers actually apply their minds. But having said that, the online contract generation tools are getting better and better every year. We're not quite at the stage where we trust them enough to use them for, across the board, but they really are improving so quickly that I think soon we're going to get to a stage where it's going to be really easy to get, documents that are 90% good enough online, in a way that's sort of commoditized and is much, much cheaper and more accessible to the population.
Speaking of that, Yvonne, what on earth are smart contracts?
Smart contracts, I don't actually like the word, because they use the word contract, but the word contract in the context of smart contract is actually more just a transaction, okay? It's a small, if this happens, then this must happen. A contract, in the way that we usually refer to it ourselves, is many, many, many terms like that are all interwoven into a kind of bigger transaction. Smart contracts are little transactions that are encoded into typically a blockchain type technology. Ethereum seems to be the blockchain technology that is the most amenable to smart contracts. But having said that, I have suspicions that even Ethereum for smart contracts actually can't handle the level of bespokeness, if that's the word, that many, even simple legal contracts need. So we're watching that space very closely. It's hugely exciting, but it's still nascent, and we're still trying to see how much smart contracts can actually hold and manage within the confines of the blockchain technology.
Yvonne, when we speak about, having to evolve and adapt, I imagine that many of the big law firms that we see in Sandton, for example, those buildings have to be paid for, which means that the fees that get ultimately charged to the client are probably incorporating the cost of delivering the service, the traditional cost of delivering the service. Over the past year, I suppose even those hardliners who insisted that that's the only way it could be done have been forced to acknowledge that there are different, more innovative, and I suspect even much cheaper ways of actually delivering legal services.
Exactly. And, I haven't seen any one of the large firms actually, once it became apparent that all of their lawyers were working from home, actually allowed their clients to enjoy some of the cost benefit of the lawyers not having to sit in the office. Obviously, the clients carried on having to pay the fees that they were paying before for the big buildings that were sitting empty. So it's been a very, very interesting time for us to watch how things go. But for all intents and purposes, the big incumbents are happily going along. They have slowed down their hiring and those types of things, but they're still, happily going along. And, it's interesting. I think the market also has become alive to the fact that actually, maybe they don't need all of that bulk and fanfare when they need their legal work done. They just need a smart lawyer to sit and do the work, turn it around quickly, and get the job done.
And I think, that realization has probably come at, as a bit of a grudge conversation for a lot of the traditionalists, but obviously it's the times that we live in. One other interesting dimension of how the legal sector has probably historically positioned itself is this issue of around conflicts of interest. I once read a very horrifying story about some person who said, well, actually, they wanted some legal services. I think it was in the conveyancing field. And then they discovered that the bank that with whom they had a dispute had literally engaged every other person that they could possibly talk to within the sector. Everyone said, oh, no, we got conflict of interest. And it turned out it simply meant that you couldn't actually access services because the market has been structured in such a way that meant that if the bank could find a way of signing a contract with every lawyer in the market, there are no lawyers left for us to access. Are you seeing maybe a change in some of those practices? Because I imagine they don't make it easy for people to access legal services.
Exactly, Kai. That's such a good point. It's not one that comes up a lot with us, but the banks do it, the big telco companies do it. They just make sure that they've engaged all the big firms on some or other little matters, so that the big firms are conflicted out of any matter that would come against them. The whole thing of conflicts of interest is so interesting because, lawyers kind of pride themselves as, being very aware of conflicts and not allowing conflicts and that kind of thing. And something that's always been a bugbear of mine is that even within normal traditional legal practice, you have a conflict of interest that right in front of you, and that is where your traditional firms place fee targets on their lawyers. So the way that works is if you're an attorney working at a traditional law firm, every month you have to bill a certain number of hours and bring in a certain amount of money to your firm in order to be retained and promoted. So your performance is actually monitored and evaluated against how much time you bill and how much money you bring in for the firm. But that then means that you're incentivized not to find very quick, easy solutions for your clients. It sometimes means that you're actually incentivized to make mountains out of molehills and make briefs bigger than they need to be and make more work than needs to happen. Of course, many lawyers don't work this way, but some lawyers, when they're under pressure, will work more on matters than they need to. And so their interests are actually misaligned from their clients' interests. And you've got an actual conflict of interest right there. The clients are needing the work turned around quickly, cost effectively. They're needing solutions, without any fuss. And the lawyers are wanting big briefs that go on forever and ever and ever, and they can carry on billing on. So that's a conflict that's also, right there. But it seems to happen, across traditional legal practice, not only in South Africa, but also across the world.
Is this perhaps a reflection of a sector that probably at some point in time forgot that it must exist to serve the interests of its clients rather than the question of what its fee targets are?
Exactly. So I think, lawyers, in the old days, lawyers were kind of seen as almost as artists. They were kind of revered and they were specialists and they would do things on their own terms. They never saw themselves as service providers. It's only in today's world where we're starting to force the change and say, well, look, we're not actually better than anyone else. We're service providers. What do our customers want? How do they want to procure these services? And how can we make the whole experience easier for them? So, yes, we're seeing that change and it's a very, very interesting space to watch.
You've been blazing the trail for 10 years in showing people how the sector can actually still deliver services in a bit of a different way. Have you received some calls in the past year or two to say, hey, hold on, it looks like you know what to do. Advise us on how to structure our operations?
Yes, absolutely. And, we're so keen to encourage competition in the space that any new players that come in doing something similar to us, we reach out to them straight away. We tell them what we've learned. We kind of make friends, straight away so that we can, all keep an eye on each other and make sure we're all doing what we're doing in the most responsible way possible. Because actually, the more competition there is in the space, the better it is for the consumer at the end of the day. That, competition and choice for the consumer is what means, that the system is actually operating very healthily and it supports the whole economy. So, yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I imagine being the trailblazer does come with, obviously, that sense of clout in the market out there. Yvonne, where we are in 2021, give me 3 interesting things that you see emerging in that sector that reforms and repurposes the sector so that it becomes more responsive to the needs of its customers. What does the legal profession look like in 2030?
Okay, so in 2030, I think we are still going to see traditional players, big traditional firms. I think they're going to be slightly smaller than they are now. They're going to be more focused on bespoke work. The next thing that you're going to see coming in is just the vast availability of commoditized, machine-generated contracts that are maybe not the best, but good enough for most businesses' needs. And unfortunately, thirdly, I think you're going to see an industry that's actually, because of the tech side coming in and the commoditization of a lot of legal work, you're going to see an industry that becomes smaller and smaller and unfortunately has less opportunity for lawyers that want to follow the traditional route. But of course, where there are changes, there's always opportunity for people with fresh thinking and people who come in wanting to make things better.
Yeah, I suppose we all have to adapt. You had a good year as Wakefield, 65% growth in revenue. What are the prospects for 2021/2022?
We're going for it. Thankfully, the model has proved itself to be completely robust now over 10 years, particularly being put through the paces, that all businesses have in the last year or two with COVID. So, this model that we've built is infinitely scalable. We're going to carry on doing things in the same way and try and grow and grow and grow and offer more services to the market. And of course, keeping our eye on where we can, keep improving, bring on new technologies, and adapt as our market adapts. And ultimately what that means is keeping a very, very close eye on the market, watching what the market needs, listening to what the market needs, and being completely responsive to what the response is from the market.
A very important story and a very important insight into what it looks like when you actually see the future early on and start implementing it. Thank you very much to Yvonne Wakefield. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Caveat Legal, who even more than 10 years ago looked at the structure of the legal industry and said, we can do better. And guess what? COVID proved that model to be the right model for the way things ought to be going forward in the legal sector. Thank you very much, Yvonne. And yeah, we'll definitely speak to her again in the future to sort of figure out some of the new and emerging trends in how legal services are indeed delivered in South Africa, because guess what? Lawyers can be remarkably expensive, especially when they say, oops, you can't talk to me. I'm an advocate. Go find an attorney. So if there is at least a change in that practice, it is something that is definitely going to be welcomed by a whole lot of us. We're going to take a short break, take some Power News headlines. Thereafter, we're going to be speaking agriculture, because guess what?